What you need for wiring your robot is 2 female connectors, I'm using Dean's, and 4 male connectors. Also for the power and light you need any resistors for the amount of voltage you have and current. For me that's going to be about 250 ohms, so I'm just going to do 2 500 ohm resistors in parallel. You need your removable link, batteries, speed controller, receiver, heat shrink, weapon speed controller, soldering iron, wire strippers, and a lighter or a heat shrink gun. To make the battery splitter so you can run more than one battery, you'll need to have 2 male connectors and add leads onto them. So I'm going to do that. They only need to be about 1 inch long. Once you finish the first one, make the second one exactly the same. Now solder the 2 connectors together. And once the wires are soldered, you can solder on a female connector to the 2. Now that the wires from these 2 connectors have been soldered together, they can be soldered to the female connector. But first, heat shrink should be slid over them so that it'll be able to be heat shrinked afterwards. Because you won't be able to get the heat shrink on if you don't do it first. Since the heat shrink won't slide on very far, you have to be careful when soldering on the connector, because otherwise the heat shrink might start to shrink. Solder the positive wire to the positive terminal and the negative to the negative terminal. Now since it needs to be in series, you'll have to connect the positive and negative from each of the connectors. So solder those together, and then put heat shrink on it. And now the positive wire from this connector right here can be connected to the positive terminal on the female connector, and the negative wire can be connected to the negative terminal. Remember to put heat shrink over each of these wires before you start, otherwise you won't be able to get it on. Now this is the series connector. Be able to plug your batteries in and it'll come out with higher voltage instead of higher amps. As you can see, you can plug the batteries in there. Now there's one output which you can go to the removable link. Now you're ready to supply power to your power splitter for your speed controllers. Pulling the link out, so it's still got power. The power will need to be split 3 ways. One for the power light, the second for the weapon speed control, for the drive speed controller, and the third for the weapon speed controller. Now, you need to have a connector for the weapon speed controller because you don't really want to solder directly to it, and it already has leads coming from it. But for the drive speed controller, it's got these handy screw terminals, and you'll be able to just screw it down in. And then for the power light, you'll have to solder it anyway. So, you'll need to have 3 wires coming from it. You can cut the drive ones, and those should be about relatively long, but depends on where your removal link is and where your drive speed controller is. I'm going to go for about maybe 2.5 inches, maybe 3. Then cut a negative wire that same length. And those should be stripped. And for the weapon speed controller, you can go a little bit shorter than that, but not too much, maybe 1.5 or 2 inches. Strip both those wires. You can try to twist all these wires together and then tin it. Which will work pretty well. You just have to make sure it's soldered well. And make sure to put heat shrink over them first. I'm going to tin it mine first before I put heat shrink over it, just so the heat shrink doesn't start shrinking. Twisting them together works somewhat, but not entirely well. As you can see, the wires are already starting to fall apart. So it's best if you get them soldered together. Very good. This being the main supply to your speed controllers, it would be very bad to have this connection break during a match. Now the positive wires have been soldered on and heat shrinked. The wires that are going to the drive speed controller should be tinned so that they don't start fraying, but don't put too much solder on them, otherwise they won't fit in the screw terminals. And then you can solder on a female connector to the 2 shorter wires for the weapon speed controller. And after you solder this connector, I think there's only one more. Remember to put the heat shrink on first. Now the power splitter's done. As you can see, plug into the output from the removable link right there. These two wires go to the drive speed controller. This connector will connect to the weapon speed controller. And the light will be able to be soldered on to these wires right here. First, I'm going to solder